Do you know this altcoin here? Hardly anyone is talking about it, even though the data is actually pretty exciting. It has dropped by over 99%, and that's exactly what suddenly makes it interesting again. The only question is this a real opportunity or just another dead coin? And that's exactly what we're going to take a closer look at now. Hi, I'm Marius from 10x Invest, and today, as mentioned, we're going to take a look at the secret network. So just relax, grab yourself a coffee, leave a like for me, and then we'll get started right away. By the way, for daily chart analysis on crypto and stocks, you can also follow me on X. It's extremely exciting. The link is down in the video description. The secret network is a layer 1 blockchain from the Cosmos ecosystem. But the biggest difference compared to most other blockchains is this. The data here is not public, but private by default. Specifically, this means normal blockchains, of course, display every transaction publicly, visible to everyone. With the secret network, however, smart contract data can ultimately be processed without anyone being able to see that data. And that's exactly the core of Secret, a private chain with smart contracts, which is ultimately especially interesting for areas like DeFi companies or even artificial intelligence. Sensitive data is often processed there, and of course, they don't want everyone to be able to see it. The innovation behind this is the so-called trusted executions. And simply put, this is ultimately a protected environment in which data can be processed without being visible to the outside. And that's exactly what leads to an exciting use case in the end. Secret ultimately combines blockchain with data privacy and artificial intelligence infrastructure. So the goal is not just to be another altcoin, but rather to serve as a kind of foundation for confidential applications in the Web3 space. But now it gets interesting, because the crucial question with Secret is of course the following. Does the market even need such a solution, or is it all technically exciting but ultimately without real demand? Let's now go through the 20 key metrics of the Secret network step by step again, and in the end, you'll be able to form a clear picture of whether this altcoin really has potential or not. The market capitalization. It's roughly 26 million. That's extremely low. We're clearly talking about a low cap altcoin here. Of course, coins like this generally have more upside potential, but at the same time, they also come with significantly higher risk. Still, this is exactly where things get interesting. When a coin is this small, the following question always comes up. First of all, why has it remained so small? And that's what we're going to clarify right now. The circulating supply. And here we actually see something very positive. Over 95% of all tokens are already in circulation. In the end, this means there's no hidden inflation, and there also won't be any major unlocks that could massively push the price down. That's a point that many investors completely underestimate. But now, of course, the exciting question is, if hardly any new tokens are coming in, where is this selling pressure actually coming from? The roadmap? Looking at the roadmap, you immediately notice this is not a hype project, but actually very technical, and the focus is clear: security, scalability, and decentralization. For example, active work is being done on solutions to ultimately solve well-known security issues, while at the same time building the infrastructure for AI applications. That sounds impressive at first, but the crucial question now is, of course, can the team really implement these complex topics? The team. And this is actually one of Secret's strongest points. The project originally comes from the MIT environment, so from a very technical background. And the focus is clearly on cryptography and data privacy. The only problem is, a good team isn't enough if the product doesn't catch on in the market. And that's exactly what we're going to look at now. The narrative is extremely exciting. Secret positions itself right between two trends: artificial intelligence and privacy. So, two areas that can experience massive long-term growth. So the idea is private AI applications on the blockchain. Sounds very strong at first, but of course the crucial question here is this combination actually needed, or is it just a good narrative? But first, let's look at the problem-solving aspect. This is again one of the more important points, because the problem is clear. Regular blockchains are completely transparent. In the end, anyone can see everything. For many applications, this is of course a huge problem. Secret solves this completely by keeping data private, even with and within smart contracts. That's technically very impressive. But now comes the crucial question again: do companies actually use this, or does it remain just theory? But first, let's talk about the topic of sustainability. Secret uses proof of stake. This means very low energy consumption compared to, for example, proof of work, like Bitcoin. That's a positive point at first, but to be honest, it's nothing special on the market anymore. The more important question here is, does sustainability even play a major role for investors anymore, especially in the USA? Now let's take a look at the topic of investors, and here things actually get a bit weaker. There are hardly any major VCs, barely any big names, not even in recent years. This means less fresh capital and of course less attention. And that's exactly what can become a massive problem, because without capital, growth is difficult on the one hand, and it's also hard to survive the bear market. But first, let's move on to the competition. Projects like Oasis and AlphaZero are working on similar solutions, sometimes even with other technologies like zero knowledge. And this is exactly where pressure arises, because in the end, the market doesn't decide based on technology, or not just on technology, but ultimately on usage. And that's precisely why the next key metric is also very important: marketing. And here you can see very clearly, SCRT is not a hype project. The visibility is rather low. There are hardly any viral trends or much attention. Of course, that can be an opportunity, but it can also become a problem because without attention, no capital comes in. And this is exactly where success is often separated from failure. Now let's move on to simplicity, the idea, and this is where it gets tricky again. The concept is not easy to understand. TE, confidential computing, AI, none of that is for beginners, and that's exactly what slows down adoption, because simple ideas spread much more easily and quickly. But does complex automatically mean bad? Not necessarily. But let's move on to the long-term vision. Here the thinking is actually on a grand scale. SCRT wants to become the foundation for confidential data processing in Web3. In other words, the infrastructure for private applications and artificial intelligence. That's a huge market, but also difficult to implement. And that's exactly why the question now is this realistic or is it too ambitious? Because now it gets critical. Let's move on to tokenomics. They don't have a hard-capped maximum supply. This means the coin is inflationary. Currently, inflation is at 7 to 9% per year. That's a clear disadvantage because in the long run, this naturally creates selling pressure. And that's exactly why the next metric is so important. The FD, fully diluted market capitalization. Here things look better again. The FDV is just above, slightly above the current valuation. That means hardly any hidden dilution. That's a solid point for now, but it also depends on the overall tokenomics. And the question is that even enough to attract investors? Let's take a look at the trading volume now. It's around $1.2 million daily. In relation to its size, that's already solid, but it also means the coin is actively traded. So liquidity is available. But the question still remains, is that enough for large investors? But first, let's take a look at the token distribution. Here we see a relatively solid picture. Most of the tokens have already been distributed. As I said, since it's inflationary, of course, many more will be added. Most of the unlocks since launch have already happened, but some of the larger wallets, let's say, still ultimately hold a lot of coins, and we'll take a closer look at that now. The top coin holders, it's just like with many proof-of-stake coins, most of them are held by the validators. These are large wallets. That's normal at first, but it's still a risk because large wallets can of course move the market, and that's why the next metric is so crucial: utility. And this is where things actually get interesting again. SCRT is used of course for fees, for staking, for governance, that is voting rights. In addition, there's the potential use in the AI sector. So that's already a clear use case. The crucial question is, how much is all of this actually being used? Now let's move on to the community. And here we see more of a small community, but actually a technical one. It's not a hype, more of a stable base. That can be good in the long term, but in the short term, the momentum is often lacking. And that's exactly why we're going to take a look now. What news or catalysts are coming up in the future? There are some important developments here. They have new updates, improvements, for example, in stability and security. The focus is clearly on AI adoption. These are potential catalysts, but the important question here is that really enough for the market to react? The SCRT network comes in at about 70% on my 10 times ranking list. That's a solid result, but not a top altcoin. You have to be honest about that. The fundamentals are suboptimal, especially the tokenomics. It's not a hype coin, no question, but rather a very technical project, an infrastructure project. Its greatest strengths are in the areas of privacy and AI, so two trends that can grow in the long term. By the way, I'll show the 20 metric analysis here with the 10 times formula so you can see how the result was determined. As I said, they have hardly any marketing, strong competition, and rather complex technology. That means the coin does have potential, but it's definitely not a safe bet. Now, of course, the question for you is, what does it look like in terms of price? What possibilities are there? So let's take a look at the price forecast, the price scenarios, and the chart analysis. Yes, welcome to the chart analysis of Secret Network. As always, we'll go through the different price scenarios, which are calculated mathematically. Personally, I don't think much of price scenarios, simply because no one can predict the future, but at least you can mathematically calculate, based on the market cap, what would theoretically be possible. And that's what we're going to go through together now. Let's start with the bear low. Mathematically calculated 3 cents is theoretically possible. That would, of course, mean a further drop in price from now, about another 63% down from here. As always, it could of course go even lower, or it might not fall that much. No one can really predict the future with 100% certainty. Then the normal scenario would be 40 cents. If you look at it from here, that would be about 377%. Then it continues. The more bullish scenario would be $1.50. In other words, that would be roughly from now, yeah, it's a bit tricky here. That would be around 17 times, so 1,700%. And also always interesting, 2030, by then it's already much higher. That would be, as you can see here, about $8. Let's take another look at that. Here, by the way, this is what the chart looked like. If you take a look here, when Secret Network launched, here it was on a Binance, you can see the top was at 10, but that's rather unrealistic for now. That's usually normal when something gets listed on an exchange, because at first a lot of people buy in, and that's why you get this $8 range. Exactly. Then we went down, and here, as I said, 1.5 was the top here. Right, and here, ultimately, the normal scenario was roughly in this area. Exactly. So now the question is, what does it look like at the moment? Exactly. I use TradingView and the 10x indicator to analyze charts for myself in a data-driven way. We had a big green dot here. That ultimately means that there was an oversold zone here because of course a lot of people sold. And then in the end a lot of people bought again here. Here you have an overbought zone. Exactly. And at the moment we formed a small green dot here that currently indicates a bullish trend reversal. But now we've hit a resistance level here again. At the moment, as you can see, we're more in the middle range here. Not overbought, but also not oversold. From my perspective, that's always a critical zone. I would generally wait with Secret Network for now and continue to analyze the chart. And if we move into lower areas here, then I would continue to analyze and see what possibilities there are. If you want to use the indicator yourself for your analyses, for example, you can find it in the 10x Elite, my complete program, but you can also get it separately. You can find all the information in the video description or simply scan the QR code here. Now that you know how strong or not strong Secret Network is, I have another analysis here of an altcoin that I personally believe in because it is extremely strong. So enjoy the next video and see you in a moment.